I'm Ann Krisnick. I'm the Executive Director of the Joint Religious Legislative Coalition. And I'm talking to you today from the State Office Building. We are here, JRLC, at one of our Come to the Capitol days, so thanks to those of you that came. So it's kind of trying a new thing, a little bit more informal. We'll be having another day like this in April. We'd love to see you on April 9th here at the Capitol Complex. But I wanted to go through the status of what's going on the JRLC bills. I'm going to spend most of the time on our top 3 priorities: an increase to the cash grant under the NFIP program, a number of issues around the Child Care Assistance Program, and then traffic fees and fines and driver's license suspension issues around that. And then I have a few more that I'll just very briefly touch on. So the Minnesota Family Investment Program, you probably know that we've been supporting a bill that would have a $50 per month increase to the MFIP grant over each of the next 4 years with an automatic 2% increase after that, so we wouldn't need to keep coming back to the legislature for additional funds. There are a number of other bills at play to increase the grant, one to increase it by $300, one to double the grant, one to raise it to what it would have been if it would have kept up with inflation, and we support all of those. It's unlikely that some of them would have much traction, but there were hearings yesterday in the House about that. We had, I testified, we had Doug Mitchell from Westminster Presbyterian, recently retired, testify, and we had 2 JRLC members that came to attend the hearing, and when they asked if there were more additional comments, both of them came forward and talked about what they've seen in their concerns and the importance of the cash grant. So I was very pleased to see that. It was a good hearing. Legislators were engaged. A lot of them clearly needed a bit more educating on MFIP, and there's a lot of new people at the Capitol this year. So that was a good hearing. It didn't pass or not pass. What tends to happen on these budget bills is they hear all of the pieces and then they lay it over. I mean, physically, they kind of put it to the side, and then when they put together their final budget bill for that committee or that division, they figure out what's going to be included. So although there were a number of different bills, they're all moved over, but it's clear that the House is committed to an MFIP increase. The chair of the Health and Human Services Finance Committee, Tina Liebling, is very, very passionate about the need for these families to get an increase. The governor's budget, if you recall, had a one-time $100 increase in the cash grant, so we'll be hearing more about that as we have hearings on the governor's budget. And on the Senate side, there's not been a hearing yet. JRLC is our lead author, and so we'll be waiting to see when we get a hearing on that. It'll be similar testimony to what we had in the House yesterday. A little bit of procedural piece. The legislature is, the process is such that they have deadlines about when certain things need to happen. And so we're coming up on what people would refer to as the first deadline. In order for a law to be viable, in order for it to have a path to actually become effective, it needs to be heard in committee in either the House or the Senate by a set date. And that deadline, first deadline, is a week from tomorrow. So if bills have not yet been heard, people are scrambling to make sure that they get their bills heard. So we've been really hopping here, testifying and attending hearings and contacting legislators. And so it's been been a busy week looking over at Katie here. The next thing I want to talk about is the Child Care Assistance Program. If you recall, we have, if the bill in the Senate that we're working on is the same as the House, the $50 per month over the next 4 years. The Child Care Assistance Program, we have 3 different issues or approaches, bills that we're looking at. The first is similar to what passed last year and ultimately didn't get signed by the governor, but some family-friendly provisions and specifically some addressing families experiencing homelessness. So they would allow them to be eligible for child care assistance for 90 days, which would allow them hopefully to find work and a place to live or have an education plan in place. It also would require an application of a homeless family experiencing homelessness to be processed within 5 days. Right now the county has 30 days to do that. That bill has passed in the House. It's been heard in one committee in the Senate. It passed there, and we expect that it will be approved. So we're kind of considering that old business, and hopefully we'll get that cleaned up. The other 2 CCAP bills both have financial implications. So the first bill is to increase the provider rates. So right now, if I'm a child care provider, whether that's in-home or a center, whatever that might be, the maximum that I can charge under the CCAP program is the 25th percentile of the market rate in my area. So they look at individual markets, they look at the average cost for infants and for toddlers and for preschoolers, and I can be reimbursed under CCAP for up to the 25th percentile. So obviously less than the market rate. As recently as 2013, that number was 25% based on a 2011 survey. It's now been reduced to 25%, and it's still on the same 2011 survey. So we have two pieces in that bill that we're working on. One is to make sure that any provider rates are based on the most current market survey. Here in Minnesota, we did one in 2018, so we have a much more current survey. And then also to raise the percentage of those rates. So in the House side, that bill would increase the percentage back up to 75%. And the Senate side, we have an author, but not with quite that language. It was difficult to find a Republican author, since they're in the majority, that would author a bill on CCAP that included that 75th percentile, because that's pricey. It costs about $1.8 million for each percentage that we raise the provider reimbursement rate. But we do have people signing on bipartisan support for a bill that recognizes a need to increase CCAP rates, and that bill as drafted just says it will be increased by blank, and then the appropriation, the cost is blank. So they would figure that out as it moved through committee. That the House this morning heard that bill in addition to a number of other bills around CCAP, and a lot of testimony from parents and providers. And so that testimony was all heard, and that's kind of laid aside for now, and we'll see what happens eventually in the Early Childhood Committee. There's also some question about how that money, what the path for that is, because the Early Childhood Committee is new this year. They're doing some work that would typically be done by the Education Committee, and some work that would be done by Health and Human Services. So they would be getting money from both of those budgets. We're not sure exactly when they finish out the session and they put it back, exactly how that's going to play out. And then the final issue we're working on for CCAP is to address the number of families that are eligible for child care assistance, but they aren't able to go to work or to school because the state doesn't have enough funds to do that. So there's a waiting list across the state. There's almost 2,000 families that are seeking child care assistance from the state, but there's a waiting list and they aren't being served. So we have a bill, we're supporting a bill that would totally fund the child care assistance program. So we wouldn't be in a situation of saying, this is how much money we have. When the money runs out, then people go on a waiting list. Instead, we would say, every person who's applicable, who qualifies, will be served. Just like we would say, we have another 5th grader, they get to come to our school, and this is the amount of state aid that we get for that student. We should have a similar process for child care assistance. So those bills are getting heard. We'll kind of see those. Again, it's a hard sell because these are expensive bills, and the Senate has made very clear that they don't want to spend much money, if any increase, but they're really hearing from people in their districts, both from providers and employers, and actually from community leaders as well, that child care is becoming a significant problem. It's impacting the ability of employers to find people to work for them. It's impacting whether companies are willing to locate to a specific community when they're trying to get them to come. So we'll be having a lot more discussion around that. And then the third area that's a top priority for us is the impact of fees and fines on low-income Minnesotans. So we have 2 bills working on this. One of them passed last year, was in that same bill I talked about earlier, that was not signed, was vetoed by the governor. And that bill would provide, or right now the current law, is that if I get a traffic violation and I can't pay it, my license gets suspended for failure to pay that ticket. Not because I'm a dangerous driver, but because of my failure to pay, which in many cases is actually an inability to pay. So there's a bill in both the House and Senate to change the law. So I would still have that fine. I'd still be turned over to the Department of Revenue for collections if I didn't pay, but I would not have my license suspended. So that would allow me to continue to have my right to drive, which especially outside the metro area is so important if I want to get to work and get my children to the doctor and all the other things that we need transportation for. So that bill was heard in the House, passed. The related bill is addressing the cost of those fines. So right now, if I am speeding, theoretically, each municipality would set their amount for the ticket for that. Let's say that might be $40. In addition to that, there's an automatic $75 surcharge that goes directly to the state into the general fund that's added on to that ticket. So any moving violation automatically becomes a ticket of more than $100, which is an incredible burden for a lot of Minnesotans and a lot of families. The law currently would allow a court to waive or reduce or exchange community service for any or all of that $40 fine, but they don't have authority to do that for the $75 surcharge. So we are seeking changes in the law that the court would have the same discretion with the $75 that they have for the local portion of the fine, and they're looking at whether it creates undue hardship on a family or an individual. And that's also been heard in the House and passed, and I don't think it has another committee to go to, but we'll see. So those are our big picture issues. I just want to talk real briefly about a few other things we're working on. We've been working on a bill to address payday lending. As you may know, many people, and they're going to a payday lender because they immediately need cash. If you took the amount of the fees and everything that they pay over the course of a year, you're looking at an annualized percentage rate of over 300% often. And these are low-income people that are in need and are being taken advantage of by these lenders. So we've been working on a bill that would limit the total, if you looked at finance charges, fees, and interest for any loan to 36%, which is still an incredibly high interest rate. That's currently the cap for members of our military who are serving our country, and we're advocating that that would be applicable to everyone else. We had a hearing on that last week. JRLC, strong supporter, and we had a Lutheran bishop that did a marvelous job for us testifying, and that passed out of the House, and we'll see what happens on the Senate side. We're continuing our work on tax, so we need to adopt a tax bill in response to the federal tax bill, and one of the consequences, intended or not, of the federal bill that was passed was an increased tax burden on families with more than 2 children. So I used to be able to have a standard deduction for each of those children, and I don't have that anymore. There's an increase in the personal exemption, but that when we add it out, it end up with really a loss for families with a number of children. So we've been working either at talking about creating a child tax credit, so you would just have a credit for each child that you have, or expanding the working family credit to add a new category for families with 3 or more children. So there was tax hearing on that yesterday. I testified in tax committee around expansion of the tax credit, and an interesting fact that I will share with you, the Pew Research Center recently released something that said that 17% of evangelical Christian families and 18% of Catholic families have 4 or more children. And we know that's true of many other Minnesota families as well. So continue to work on expanding the working family credit. Restore the Vote, there was a hearing yesterday on Restore the Vote in the House, and it seems to be having a fair amount of speed behind it. So we'll see what happens on the Senate side. And the last thing, and you'll be seeing this in our email, we'll be taking part in a hearing a week from today, next Thursday, March 14th. And this is the bill to increase the funding available to nonprofits that may be the victims of hate or bias crimes. So you may recall that we had a mosque in Bloomington, Dar al-Farouk, that was bombed, and they had no video surveillance because there wasn't money to do that. And so Minnesota has established a fund to make money available. There's an application process for nonprofits for purposes of assessing where they are, to buy equipment, to make plans for how they proceed, but that money isn't going as far as the need. And so we'll be supporting a bill to expand that, and that's an issue kind of like our MFIP hearing was yesterday, that we would love to have people attend if you're able. It'll be at 5:30, so outside the workday, 5:30 next Thursday, and you'll be seeing more about that in your email. We always close our telephone calls, so I'll do this as well, by asking, what should I do? And the big thing is, make sure you're in contact with your legislator. If you've been to Day on the Hill, make sure to say, we met at Day on the Hill, or we talked about this issue when I was there in February. If you weren't at Day on the Hill, start the relationship now, either by calling or by emailing, and make sure that they're hearing about the concern for these Minnesotans who are really struggling. So our number 3 issues we are wanting people to talk about right now are an increase to the MPIP cash grant, improvements in the child care assistance program, and then eliminating this practice of driver's license suspension. But as you noted, we're involved in a number of other issues as well. So please keep in contact with your legislators. If you're in the Capitol, send Katie or I an email. I'm here every day, at least part of some day every day.
Our next come to the Capitol.
Oh, okay. And Katie's reminding me, or we have another day like today on April 9th. So we have a bunch of things set up. We're having issue briefings periodically through the day, talking about advocacy. You can always contact either one of us and say, I'm going to be at the Capitol. What issues are important? What matters? So until a few weeks from now, thank you, and thank you so much for your work on behalf of struggling Minnesotans.